All right. So this is the hypothesis testing review, and I want to make sure that you have all the information lined up before you take your quiz. So to begin with, we know that there are the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. All right, so the null hypothesis is your default belief or your default something about a parameter's value. So usually these will be stated within the problem, and your alternative hypothesis is your unproven belief about a parameter. Okay. And so, for example, the default belief for a coin toss would be about 50%, right? So your null hypothesis is that the probability of it becoming tails or heads would be 50%. And then the unproven belief would be your null or your alternative hypothesis, which would be that the coin would not be 50%, or the coin is greater than, or the coin would flip heads less than, whatever your alternative hypothesis would be. All right, so for the alternative hypothesis, we have to find evidence that this is true. Okay, so if you remember back to your freshman year, this could be also your alternative hypothesis could also be your claim. And then now we're going to have to find evidence about that. So the evidence that we usually find, one, you have to collect like the 3 conditions, right? So just a quick review about the 3 conditions. Okay, so first, is it a random sample? Okay, usually when we see SRS, that usually means that it is a random sample. And number 2, is it 10% of your population? So you're going to complete the, is it 10% of your population? So if you have 100 people and you want to see if there's at least 10 people, right? So that means that your population is large, that your sample is 10%. And then now we also want to look for normality. Okay, so this is, you want to look at the shape. Does it have that bell curve shape that we've been looking at? All right, so those are your conditions. Okay. So now that we have our conditions, we are going to check our p-value. Okay. So your p-value, that's your probability value. You want to see if your p-value is less than your alpha level. Okay, and default alpha level would be 5%. Or 0.05. And if your p-value is less than your alpha, then we are going to reject the null hypothesis. So this means that there is convincing evidence. So convincing, nope. All right, so convincing evidence that your alternative hypothesis is true. All right. Now, if your p-value is greater than or equal to your alpha level, that means we're going to fail to reject the null hypothesis. So this means that we don't have enough evidence. Of your alternative hypothesis. Okay, so now how do we find our p-value, right? So we are going to use your calculator to find your p-value. All right, and so there are two kinds of tests that you will have to run. And so one of them would be, so the first test that we kind of learned about was the one prop z-test. Okay, and so this is what this does is it performs a z-test to compare a population proportion. So keyword here is proportion to a hypothesis value. All right, and so what are the things that you will need for your z-test? Okay, so first you will need the proportion, and this is in your null hypothesis. Okay, so the proportion of your null hypothesis, that's why there is the subscript null there, right, or not, so then that's your null hypothesis. And you're also going to need the number of successes in your sample. So that is the number of things that meet your criteria, right? So in a class of 30, how many are at the mean or greater of 5, 6, right? So then the number of students that are 5, 6 and taller, that would be your number of successes in your sample. Okay. So then n would represent your sample size. Okay. And then your prop, right? So you are going to choose, is it not equal to your proportion? Is it less than your proportion, or is it greater than your proportion? So then you're going to pick one of these three in your calculator, and then you press draw, and you are going to get different kinds of shapes. All right. So if your not equal to, you're going to get a two-tailed. So that means the left and right tails will be colored in, right? If it's less than, then you'll get the left tail. And if it's greater than, you will get the right tail. So that is the one prop z-test. Okay. And now we're also going to look at the other test. So then that's the t-test. So your t-test is a statistical test used to compare the means of two groups. And for this, you will need a few values, right? So the first one would be your mean in your null hypothesis. And so again, the H naught is there to represent the mean for your null hypothesis. All right, and then X bar would be your sample mean. And your standard deviation for your sample, so sample standard deviation. Okay, sorry, my writing's getting sloppy. And then n would be your sample size. Okay, and then again, you would choose your alternative hypothesis. So you have your mu here, and it'll say, is it not equal to your mu, your mean and your null hypothesis? Is it greater, or is it less than, sorry, or is it greater than? And then again, you would have your two-tailed test. Ooh, okay. These bell drawings are rough. Is it going to be a left tail test or is it going to be a right tail test? Okay, so you're going to perform these two tests, or one of them, sorry. You're going to perform one of these two tests depending on your problem. And then you are going to come up with your conclusion. All right, and so basically your conclusion is going to say something like, because our p-value of, you insert your p-value, is greater than or less than, okay, so make sure you use your words, greater than or less than our alpha level of, okay, we will reject or fail to reject our null hypothesis. Okay, we do or do not have enough convincing evidence that our alternative hypothesis, and then you write something about the context of it. Okay, and so again, just to recap what you're going to be filling out for your conclusion. So because our p-value, so you're going to need to make sure that you fill it in with your p-value information. P-value is greater than or less than, so pick one, greater than or less than our alpha level of, usually it's given to you. We reject or fail to reject our null hypothesis. So you're going to pick one, reject the null hypothesis, or fail to reject the null hypothesis. Okay, and we do or don't, again, pick one, we do or don't have enough convincing evidence that the alternative hypothesis, and then state what that would be. Okay, so in the practice sheet we gave you, this would be something about like, is there really home court advantage? And so because our p-value was whatever it is that you found is greater than or less than our alpha level of, I don't remember what it was, we fail to reject the null hypothesis. We don't have enough convincing evidence that there is a home court advantage during the NBA bubble. Okay, so that is it, and that's kind of the review for your hypothesis testing. Make sure to review these conditions. Okay, and so we have we've done work on this, how to calculate the 10%, how to do the normality levels, how to do it for large counts. So just make sure you review all that and you'll be fine. So I'll see you on Thursday for your test.